So you got xenomorph problems, do you now? Well, Ripley ain't the only slayer around here. Hello, my noble band of outlaws. Outlaw Samurai coming at you live with a video. Well, in this insanely bright lighting, and with a drink, this is water, by the way. As you can tell by the intro to this video, we are going to be talking about xenomorphs. More along the lines of what medieval weaponry would be best to combat the xenomorphs. And unlike most of my other videos, I've made a script. I love how my camera just auto brightens the situation. I mean, yeah, that's a little more flattering light, I think. But in any case, after toying around with that, the scenario we are going to be finding ourselves in is a huge space tanker in the middle of nowhere. The crew has all been used to breed xenomorphs, and the only survivors take refuge on the bridge. Sorry, my handwriting's a little fuzzy. While the only ones to fight the threat are 10 highly trained military personnel. And I know in horror movies that's not really a good thing because the military dudes always end up dying in the end. Or there's that one badass who makes it to the end of the movie that subsequently dies. Well, in this scenario, these 10 highly trained individuals, they're all expert xenomorph fighters. Like, they've fought many xenomorphs before. This takes place in the Alien franchise, where many humans have fought xenomorphs. Okay? Now, their skills are all equal in regards. That means no one fighter is more skilled than the other. They have to fight in 2 locations on the ship. If you're wondering about that flowery stuff behind me, that's my grandma's shirts and stuff. But in any case, she just hangs above. Never mind them. Alright, so with that in mind, the 2 locations are the cargo hold of the ship. Is the ship's cargo hold. That's the first location. The second location is the life support systems room. I really don't know what kind of sciencey, techno, babble, mongo, jongo, whatever the hell you call it in geek. I'm redneck, I love sci-fi, and I'm an otaku, which is Japanese for nerd, but I'm not a real geek. Well, in any case, the second location would be the life support systems operation room. Now, the armory is only stocked with medieval weapons. That's the key there. Medieval weapons. And you can only choose 1 weapon per team. Well, not per team. 1 weapon per individual. Okay. And then, from these choices, you have the following. You have the swords, the polearms, and the long-range weapons. The swords you can choose from are a Kritzmesser, a longsword, a Tachi, a claymore, a Nodachi, a war sword. Those are the swords. Just get those out of the way. The polearms you can choose from are the halberd, the naginata, the warhammer, the yari, the pike, the spear, the poleaxe, and a bearded axe. I gotta throw in a little Viking there too. And the long-range weapons you can choose from are the longbow, the recurve bow, the crossbow, the throwing knives, kunai, and throwing spikes. Which, for those of you who don't know, they are metal spikes that are tipped at both ends, and when thrown, they can actually sink into a human skull. Like, throwing spikes are basically a more along the lines kill-oriented version of damn it, not kunai, throwing stars. The name escapes me at this time. I know the actual name for the throwing stars. It's just the name escapes me at this. Shuriken, yeah. Shuriken. They're basically the killing-oriented version of a shuriken. I'm just going to use the fact that this thing makes my camera auto-dark for a minute. And with that in mind, there's the scenario. Now, along the lines of the teams that are going to be fighting, you have 2 teams, each consisting of 5 men. They are Team Blue, which has Soldier A. He chooses the longsword. Soldier B, he chooses the poleaxe. Soldier C chooses the longbow, and Soldier D chooses the nodachi, and Soldier E chooses the yari. That's A, B, C, D, E. Okay? Now, Team Blue, they're going to be fighting in the, I want to say, the life support system room. They're going to be fighting in location 2, where the Queen is. And Team Red, that's the second team. Soldier A chooses the Tachi, Soldier B chooses the Warhammer, Soldier C chooses the recurve bow, and Soldier D chooses the war sword, and Soldier E chooses a bearded axe. So, I know I've left a few of those weapons out. It's just what I would personally want. I mean, this is basically a what-if scenario. You can play with it any way you want, and if you want to play with the weaponry that I've chosen and the teams, you can do that at home and make a video for it online, go away. And with that in mind, back to the scenario that we are in with the xenomorphs. Sorry, my uncle is annoying me. So, with that in mind, Team Blue, they'll be going for the Life Support Systems room, or the SSR. And the Team Red will be going for the cargo hold. Now, as I said, this is a what-if scenario with a team of Xenomorph Slayers. If I personally was going to do a list of what weapons would I personally use to fight Xenomorphs, this would be a different set of categories. Because y'all know me, I'm going to be choosing at least one Oriental weapon and maybe a couple European. But aside from that, so in these scenarios, we're going to focus on Team Blue. We're going to focus on Team Red first. I know I mentioned Team Blue first, but we're going to be talking about Team Red first. Now, Team Red, they get to the cargo hold, and that's where all the Xenomorphs are. That's like the majority of the drones are in the cargo hold. And you're probably thinking, well, shouldn't they be with the Queen? And that's not necessarily true. The drones, they're more, when it comes to Xenomorphs, the drones are very much similar to insects, where the drones, they protect the nest. So it only makes sense that the Xenomorph drones would start spreading out over the ship and only really come together when the Queen needs protection. So with that in mind, Team Red, they make it to the cargo hold, and the Xenomorphs attack them. Now, Each one of these soldiers, again, are highly skilled. Team Red, the Tachi user, he's making full advantage of his weapon. Okay, the Tachi, it's longer, it's heavier than a katana, so you don't have to swing as hard or as fast in order to do the same amount of damage. Ergo, you're saving energy in the long run. So he's using the Tachi masterfully. I should have mentioned this before, but they all have acid-proof armor on as well. So it's mainly the weaponry that we're focusing on here. Now with the Tachi, again, being the longer, heavier version of everybody's favorite Japanese sword, the katana. Well, not everybody's. Personally, my favorite Japanese sword is the Tachi, or a nodachi, or a short nodachi. But with that in mind, is like everybody harps on this thing, and yeah, he's using it like a standard katana. He's slashing at the heads. He's slashing at the tails. Now, when you're using a sword against a xenomorph, you have to be in much closer proximity to the xenomorph. Let's say this Sharpie was the xenomorph, and my sword is me. Now, with that in mind, I know this is an obvious size difference, but you get the general idea that in order to deal damage... Wait a minute. Okay. We'll use this as an example. My pocket knife is my... Let's pretend the pocket knife is the Tachi. Okay? Now, to deal damage to the xenomorph, I have to get in close to the thing. So, when I cut the xenomorph, naturally, blood and stuff is going to be spilling out. And because of my armor, I'm safe. And because my sword is made out of adamantium, my sword won't get hurt. But as I'm fighting one xenomorph, the possibility of another xenomorph coming up from behind me is a very likely scenario. So what do I do? Well, in a situation where you're fighting more than one opponent and you only have one weapon, the katana, what you want to do, well, he's using the Tachi, but what you want to do generally is you want to strike your opponent down with the least amount of movement as possible. So that means he wants to kill the xenomorph in one blow, then quickly switch to the next one. If it takes more than one blow, that slows you down, and in a fight against a horde of xenomorphs, even one misstep can mean your death. Okay? So with that in mind, he'd want to employ a few spinning tactics. I know a lot of you historical sword nuts out there are like, no, he said spinning. That's clearly Hollywood. Actually, not necessarily, because if I'm not mistaken, many Chinese sword styles, they use spinning in their sword styles. Now, granted, you don't want to do the big-ass Hollywood spin. Like, you don't want to go like that. No. If, like, Hollywood shit, no. It's more along the lines of using the fact that your sword is curved, you can actually contort the curve around your body to get the xenomorph behind you. At least that's what I would imagine. But it's more along the lines of you want to do a quick turn. If I had to put it into a time span, your turn should take no longer than half a second to a second to do. Not the whole 3-second turning thing we see in slow motion Hollywood sword fights. And if you're using Hollywood sword techniques against xenomorphs, you should just lay down your sword, take off your armor, and say, "Take me, motherfuckers, I'm just a dumbass." Hollywood sword fighting is not real sword fighting. It's staged performances. Real sword fighting is a lot deadlier, where the object is to kill your opponent. So, yeah. Don't use Hollywood fighting techniques against xenomorphs. Use actual fighting techniques. So if you're going, so he's using the Tachi. That's what I would imagine him doing. He'd have to perform quick cuts, quick and fatal cuts, with a cut at the neck, or even cutting, because the xenomorph, they have a massive head, okay? And cutting that head anywhere in half, if you cut into that head anywhere, you're going to kill the thing in one blow. That's a given. And also cutting them in half. Now, the Predators, their weaponry make quick work of xenomorphs. It's basically if xenomorphs have a hard exoskeleton that normal weapons don't easily penetrate, then since our weapons are made out of adamantium, they're going to go through them the same way the Predator weapons do. So it's basically fighting an unarmored, naked opponent. So, with that in mind, not only do you have the huge advantage with the weapon, but since the xenomorph's acid blood can't affect it, again, another plus. Now, with that in mind, again, if you're going to be using a sword, quick, precise movements, deadly strikes, and you'll defeat the xenomorph. Now, Soldier B chooses a poleaxe. And a poleaxe is a little different beast altogether. Okay, with a poleaxe, you basically have an axe head. We're going to pretend this comb is an axe head. You have a spear on top of the axe head, and then you have a spike coming out the back. That's a classic poleaxe. And with the poleaxe, you actually have a few more, I want to say, options when it comes to dealing death to these things. Because with the poleaxe, you can chop with the axe head, then you can backswing and impale them with the spike, and then you can thrust with the spearhead. So you can actually take out 3 xenomorphs in roughly only 2.5 movements. Like, it's mainly just bam, 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 and you're taking out 3 xenomorphs. Now, again, I'm kind of exaggerating the speed that you can do this, because the poleaxe is a much larger, heavier weapon and requires more space to be swung. But in historical times, the poleaxe, along with the halberd and the warhammer, these were called anti-armor weapons. They were used for a reason. These weapons were designed to basically act as can openers and get through the metal plate armor of the periods they were used in. And these weapons were so deadly efficient that they demanded their own martial arts style be created specifically to learn them. Okay, it's not the same thing as picking up a mace or a hammer and you can just wham, smash, and bash your way through shit. It was the polearm, the halberd, and the poleaxe, they required the same amount of training as swords in some cases. And swords took years to learn how to use. It's not like you can just say, oh, I picked up this katana, I'm now a Bushido master, don't mess with me, bro. It's basically the arrogance of, you have one guy who picks up a sword, swings it around for a couple of weeks, and immediately says, I'm a samurai, I'm the strongest swordsman in my friend group, I can beat you easily. And then you have the dude go up against an actually trained Bushido master or Kenjutsu master, and he fights the dude, and it's like, and the Bushido master's like, you're not even worth my time. But if you really want to get your ass humiliated, I have a few seconds to spare. And the Bushido master completely wrecks this would-be samurai. It's the same situation with the halberd and any weapon, basically. You have to be trained in how to use it. And remember, all these guys are equally trained, so they all know, so they can basically interchange their weapons. Okay, but the halberd user, the poleaxe user, what I would recommend he do. I take full advantage of the fact that the poleaxe, that's about a 10-foot long weapon, okay? That means you're roughly gripping about 4 feet of the thing at any given time between your arms. Like, pretend there was a 4-foot expansion between my arms. You're basically gripping 4 feet of the thing at any time, leaving 3 feet of actual weapon at the ends that you can keep your opponents at bay with. And some pole arms, they had metal weights at the bottom. So you could literally, after you've axe swung one end, if you had to, you could then pull the axe out, rotate the axe up while pushing it through your hand. So basically, like this, if I was to swing my axe this way, just rotating my hand and sliding my hands up the axe, I could bash a xenomorph in the jaw with my metal weight at the end. And then just come around and smite him rightly with the axe blade. And I could even then, after I've just axed one of the xenomorphs, I could then just swing, swing backwards, and the spike would take care of any xenomorph that was behind me. Pull it out, and then if another xenomorph is charging right at me, I can thrust directly into him with the spear. And if I had to, once I pull the spear out, I can then just push the poleaxe through my hand and again use the weighted end and bash into the xenomorph's head like I was using a mace. So the poleaxe has more versatility, though it does have a few more restrictions on the fact that it's longer, it's heavier, and you requires more room to use it. But that is what I would feel the poleaxe user would definitely be most advantageous of if he used powerful movements, and also if he kept the momentum of his weapon going. Like, let's say he completely chops through one xenomorph. Instead of just stopping the axe there and bringing it up again for another chop, which requires a lot more energy than if you were to just let that axe continue moving and eventually using its momentum, the axe would get into a position where you could then chop again. So, if you know how to use it, it can be a very deadly weapon, and it was a very deadly weapon on the battlefields. Polearms were made to keep sword users, for example, at bay. It's like the only natural enemy that a sword faced on the battlefield was a polearm. Unless you used a great sword, then it was kind of a more equal exchange of blows there. But in any case, with that in mind, the poleaxe user I would definitely consider if he was to continuously use the momentum of his weapon, and if he was to stay in a space where his weapon could move freely without any interruptions, he would definitely have a huge advantage over the xenomorphs, who are basically naked without weapons, except for their dick tongues and their tail blades. Next, I'm going to go into the longbow user. And the longbow user, it's a little different animal. I would imagine, because with the longbow, you're using about a 6-foot long bow, so you obviously need a little bit of space for the limbs to move freely, as to not interfere your shooting. But with that in mind, if the longbow user was in the fight, I would definitely have somebody guarding him. Where it's like, because even historically speaking, a professionally trained longbowman in medieval Europe could fire about 100 arrows in a minute. And that was because he had trained himself so severely that he could just pull, knock, load, shoot. Like, he's just doing the Hawkeye shit. And that's completely... Humans are completely able to do that. It's not just movie magic. Maybe not as fast as Hawkeye does it. But you can actually train yourself to off of complete muscle memory, pull arrows from your back quiver, load them onto the string, draw, and fire all in one continuous movement, which increases your shooting speed significantly. So if the longbow user was in the fight, I would definitely put him up high, where not only does he have a good view of the entire room, the whole survey, where he can survey the entire room, but he can also shoot arrows at any xenomorph that would cause trouble. For example, the poleaxe user. What if he is busy taking out? What if he's right in the middle of attacking one xenomorph when another one is about to pounce on him? Take an arrow, shoot him in the head, bam. And with that in mind, as I mentioned before, he would need to be in a place up high, well secluded, guarded, and can shoot his arrows freely. Now, if I'm imagining this correctly, I would imagine him being up in the rafters, like in the steel rafters above the cargo hold. I would imagine that would be the best vantage point for him, because not only would he be able to see any xenomorphs on the ground, he'd also be able to see any xenomorphs that would be coming after him and take them out. Or if he was maybe there was a platform overlooking the main bulk of the cargo bay, and he's up there. Maybe have the Tachi user or a sword user kind of be guarding him a little bit, because I would imagine he would be the first one the xenomorphs would really target, because he's raining death down on them. So with that in mind, if the bow user, in my opinion, he needs to be somewhere high up, guarded, and well secured. And that's what I do. And when it comes to the bow, like the type of bow I would use, I would definitely choose an English longbow. And you're probably wondering, why would I choose an English longbow? Well, the longbow design is simple, it's powerful, and considering that even the bow would be made out of adamantium, a metal bows shoot a lot harder than wood or composite plastic ones. So yeah, raining death down. So that's what I would consider for the longbow user. Now we have the Nodachi user, Soldier D. Remember, Soldier C was longbow, Soldier B was poleaxe, and Soldier A was longsword. Soldier D is using a Nodachi. And what a Nodachi is basically the Japanese equivalent of a Zweihander, or a greatsword. It's relatively around 6 feet long, and it requires similar amount of space as a polearm. So, in my mind, I could actually easily see the polearm user and the Nodachi user fighting side by side. Because the Nodachi user, he has about 2 feet of grip and 4 feet of blade that he can use to swing around and cut the zombies with. Why did I say zombies? I mean xenomorphs with. So, in my opinion, if you're going to be using a Nodachi, you need to remember that a Nodachi actually handles similar to that of a polearm. So, whenever you're cutting into the xenomorphs, don't try to stop the blade mid-swing after you've cut through one and then change direction. What you should do is, after you've cut through one xenomorph, use the momentum of the blade, bring it around, and then cut another. Do the same thing over and over again, so it's continuous swooping motion. So you're basically going in a continuous swooping motion similar to this. where it's like you're using the blade's momentum to your advantage. So that's what I would picture a Nodachi user doing, similar to the polearm user, where he's using the momentum and the weight of his weapon to his advantage. Now, we get into the Yari user, Soldier E. And a Yari is basically a 12-foot long spear that was used to pierce through metal armor. Now, that roughly what I'm imagining is about 10 feet of shaft with a 2-foot head, which is a 2-foot long spearhead, double-bladed, and goes into a triangular tip. So, with that in mind, what could happen is, similar to the poleaxe, you have to use the momentum of the Yari to your advantage. Now, a Yari is more along the lines designed for thrusting than anything else. It is a thrust-oriented weapon. So, with that in mind, the thrust-oriented weapon would do better to take out, like, if you have multiple xenomorphs lined up in a row where you can thrust through one xenomorph and you can get 2 more in one thrust, I could very much foresee him, like the Yari user, being a lot more calculating in how he uses it. And suffice it to say, you can even cut with a Yari. It's nowhere near as effective as a sword when it comes to cutting, but you can cut with them. They're not just blunted spear blades like most European spears were. Like, I don't want to say all European examples of fighting spears were blunted, but I would think that the majority of them were, just because you really don't need a sharp edge on a spear generally, because they are piercing weapons. All you really need is a sharp point. So, with the Yari, being able to cut as well with thrusting is a very good combination. And I guess you could deliver some pretty devastating cuts just considering the length of the Yari, because with cutting, length equals leverage, leverage equals power. Okay? Equals ease of cutting. Also speed and velocity. The more speed and velocity you can get into whatever part of the blade you're striking your target with, the better it will cut with. That's why whenever we cut with swords, we cut with the upper third of the blade. So basically, from my fingers upward is where we cut with swords. Now, this is different for all different swords. It's similar to what the sweet spot is for baseball. You know, you have that sweet spot of the bat, where you have a sweet spot of the sword for cutting. And with that in mind, because you have the sweet spot for cutting, you can deliver impressive cuts. And with the Yari being as long as it is, and with it actually having an edge, a blade on it, it's not just a pointed spear, it actually has a sharpened edge. You can deliver some impressive cuts with a Yari. Now, I would imagine the Yari would have to be a little wider and a little longer than the general Yari blade. Well, this Yari blade will roughly translate to a 2-foot long blade, so maybe forged it a little wider would be a perfect way to cut. Because if I remember, a Yari blade is pretty much only about as thick as the width between my 2 fingers. And it's about yay thick. I'm roughly generating my guess off of pictures I've seen. But since I do not own a Yari, I want a Yari, but I do not own one, I'm roughly guessing my estimates off of what I've seen. So, with that in mind, I would imagine the Yara user, he'd be a little more calculating in how he used his weapon than the polearm user, than the poleaxe or the Nodachi user, considering the fact that his weapon, similar to the poleaxe, it can cut and thrust at the same time. It's just that his weapon isn't going to be near as effective as cutting as the Nodachi or the longsword user. So with that in mind, how would Team Blue win the fight in the... you know what? I think I just contradicted myself. I thought I was going to talk about Team Red first. But I ended up talking about Team Blue first. Okay, so to salvage this, everything I talked about with the Tachi earlier in the video can be applied to the longsword, with a few exceptions. The longsword being a double-edged blade. When one side gets, like, you could cut with one blade and then backhand with the other. And there's much more techniques you can perform with a longsword, like thumb grip and false edge cutting and stuff like that. I might just make a completely separate video about longswords versus the xenomorph. So, I accidentally talked about Team Blue first. Salvaged it, thankfully. Now we're going to be talking about Team Red. And I already explained everything about the Tachi. But first off, how would Team Blue win? Well, it would come through coordinating their efforts, fighting as a unit, and communicating. And prioritizing the safety of the more key fighters. Where it's like, you have to prioritize the safety of your longbowman. He's the guy who's watching your backs, sniping the opponent. You gotta prioritize the polearm users. They're the ones who are taking out like multiple opponents at once. And the longsword user and the Nodachi user, they have to help protect the other three. So it's an entirely system based on protecting your teammates and keeping each other safe, and you'll win the day. Now, that's if you're fighting the normal drone xenomorphs who aren't very powerful and can basically be dealt with a simple bullet to the head. But what if you're going to be fighting the more powerful queen? That's where... Actually, that's what Team Blue is. They're in the life support room. Well, we're going to change it. They were in the cargo bay. Okay, Team Blue went to the cargo bay. Team Red went to the life support system room. See, I can salvage my videos. Just since it's a 38-minute video, I don't want to restart. So, with that in mind, the lid's already off. I'm a dumbass. So, with that in mind, trying to turn the brightness down a bit. But, with that in mind, how would the Xeno... It's like, so, we've talked about how Team Blue would have handled the cargo hold. Let's go to Team Red, who are in the life support system room. That's where the nest is. Now, first of all, they're going to be in charge of destroying all the xenomorph eggs. That's the first thing you gotta do. You gotta destroy the eggs, destroy the face huggers. That's easy to do. But then you're gonna have to take out Big Mama herself, the Queen. And the Queen, she's the biggest, the strongest, the most powerful of all the xenomorphs. And with that in mind, sorry, I was watching something. And with that in mind, she's also going to be summoning whatever drones that Team Blue didn't manage to kill back to protect her and help her fight. So let's say that Team Blue, they managed to kill the majority, but there's about 30 or 40, maybe max 50 xenomorphs that they didn't kill, all coming after Team Red. What would happen in that situation? Well, first of all, I would think that the Queen, she would send her drones in first to see if they couldn't kill the kill the humans. And what would happen in that situation? Well, first of all, the Tachi user. The Tachi user would, again, he would be using his sword to its most effectiveness. He'd be using precise, detailed strikes and very minimal movements in order to overpower the Queen drones and kill as many as he can while still remaining safe himself. Now, a different topic altogether is the Warhammer user. The Warhammer user is a different subject altogether. Okay? Because with a Warhammer, you really only have two options. You can either spike something through the head, or you can smash the head in. Because with Warhammers, generally they have a spike on the back of them and a hammerhead on the front. Now, with that in mind, I could see like the Warhammer user, he's horsing his way through the xenomorphs. He's bashing their heads in, and as soon as he bashes in one, he can bring his hammer around, like spike the other one. And some Warhammers even have a spike on the end of the grip where he could spike them with the grip. And since he's using blunt force, what I could imagine being the easiest means of defeating the xenomorphs with the Warhammer is quite simply along the lines of you smash one skull and then quickly, using the momentum of your weapon, just like a polearm user and the Nodashi user, using that weapon's momentum, swing it around and then bash another skull in. And just keep repeating that process, all the while taking out whatever opponent is closest to you. It's like, don't worry about the opponents far off. The others will handle that will handle that very well. Next, the recurve user. Again, similar to the longbowman, the recurve user would have to be up high, where he has full vantage point, in a place where he's easily defended, and where he can take out the xenomorphs quickly and efficiently. Now, what that means is, since you're now in the Queen's egg chamber, it's a little different. Just a little. In the sense that, because of the differences here, the xenomorphs are, like, I would imagine that the ones guarding the Queen are even stronger. And hold on a moment. Sorry about that. That was something I wanted to watch. In any case, where was I? Oh yes, the recurve bow user. He would have to be in a place where he would be easily defended, but in the fight with the Queen, I would feel like the Queen, when she starts seeing, because the Queen, she has far more intelligence than the average xenomorph. When the Queen starts to realize, like, hey, these guys are dangerous, I should step in here and keep my children safe. She's naturally going to try to find out who's the most dangerous. And the archer in the rafters raining death down from above where the xenomorphs can't see him, she's naturally going to go after the archer first. So, The archer, he needs to be in a place, again, easily defendable, but also, in this instance, even more easily escapable and accessible. Where it's difficult for the queen to gain access to him, but easily enough for him to be able to escape without the whole dying part or getting eaten. Actually, I really don't think the xenomorphs eat their prey. I think they just, along the lines of, impregnate them with facehuggers. But aside from that, we're going to assume that the xenomorphs actually do eat their prey. So, with that in mind, he has to get out of there, switch to a different location where he can still rain death down from above. And I think that's the line of a Sabaton song. But aside from that, that's what I would think that the recurve user would do in this fight, where he would have to be high above and easily protected from the xenomorphs. Next, we have the war sword user. And the war sword user generally is similar to that of a Nodachi user. Sorry. The war sword user. Sorry, I had to take a drink. The war sword user, very much similar to the Nodachi user. He would be using the momentum of his weapon to keep his sword in a constant loop, where it would be less tiring and more efficient for the fight. And he'd be using his weapon to kill as many as possible with precise, quick movements. Not as quick as the Tachi user, and maybe not as precise given the fact that the war sword is a bigger weapon, but it would be fairly damn close. And next, the bearded axe user. The bearded axe user is exactly the same as the warhammer, the pole axe, and even the yari, and in some instances where the bearded axe, it generally doesn't have a spike on the back, so it's more along the lines of you only have one face to do the killing with. So with that in mind, you're slashing through one xenomorph, slashing through another. You're using the momentum of your weapon to keep it going, keep hacking and slashing through those xenomorphs. And eventually, you kill the rest of the 50 xenomorphs. Like, let's say that the time frame, it takes you about 20 minutes to kill the rest of the 50 xenomorphs with all 5 of your members unharmed. I know that's a stretch, but again, these are highly trained personnel, and they're wearing xenomorph-proof armor. But what about when you fight the Queen, okay? So, let's go back to Team Blue here for a minute. Team Blue, they've done what they have to. They've rid the xenomorphs of the base. Now, naturally, they would go to help Team Red. So, Team Blue, they show up, and now you have the longsword user, the poleaxe user, the longbow user, the Nodachi user, the Yari user, the Tachi, the Warhammer, the Recurve, the War Sword, and the Bearded Axe members. You have both teams all tag teaming up against the Queen. Now, hold on a moment. Now, we have we have both teams assembled together, and they're all going to fight against the Queen. Now, the Queen being the most powerful of all the xenomorphs, naturally she'd be the hardest to defeat. And back when in the first AVP movie, we see the Predator and a human barely able to defeat the Queen. This time around, it's going to be a little different, considering the fact that this time around, you're not only having 10 highly skilled combatants all fighting the Queen, but they're all armed to the teeth as well with the respected weapons they chose. Now, with that in mind, does that mean that the humans would easily overpower the Queen? Not necessarily, considering the fact that the Queen herself is still very powerful. She's the strongest of all the xenomorphs. She's intelligent. Um, she'd be able to recognize fighting potential, where it's like she recognizes that these guys are a threat. I gotta take him out quickly. So she'd be balls to the wall fighting them. They're getting smashed and bashed against everything. And how they end up finally winning the battle is the way I would foresee it. How they would win is everyone starts to attack the Queen separately. Whereas the polearm users, what they would do is they would all try to pin down the Queen, or at least corner her into a situation to which the so here's how I would do it. I would have the polearm users corral the Queen, sort of, and the archers make her attention be split. So the Queen having her attention split between the men who are fighting her, between the polearm users and arrows flying at either side of her. There's another weakness I forgot to mention. The bows would have limited arrow supplies, so they'd have to be cautious on how many arrows they use. But I guess in this case, what they could do is they could reuse their arrows after the fight. So it's like, after they've killed the other xenomorphs, the archers start to gather up all the shot arrows.
What in the world?
Just a moment. Sorry about that. My grandma with Joe overreacted. Tried to say it fancy, but I couldn't. Anyways, time for the wrap up.
What are you doing up there, CT?
Time for the wrap up. As I was trying to finish without all this rude interruption. How I would do is, like, as I said, the polearm users, they would corral the xenomorph Queen and keep her in place while the archers distracted her. And then what I would have is the sword users, the long sword users, the Nodachi, the war sword, the Tachi, all of them, they would start hacking away at the Queen. Whereas they would hack away at her legs, her arms, her tail, leaving her a limbless corpse, basically. And then I'd have all them, at least all the sword users and all the polearm users, aimed directly for her head, where the archers, they would unload every last bit of arrow they had into the Queen's head. The polearm users would stab, thrust, and bash into the head, and the sword users would cut off the head, effectively saving the Queen, protecting the survivors, and then eradicating the threat on board ship. But those are just my thoughts and my analysis on this very specific situation. Tell me what you think of it. Maybe make a response video. Share it with me in the comments below. Subscribe if you want. And until next time, my noble band of outlaws, Outlaw Samurai, tells all y'all, be crazy rednecks, be safe when using your weapons, and I'm out. Peace.